The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Well, good morning, Fall River. How are we today? Seems like I'm all alone in the studio at the moment. There's nobody here. We have an event going on here at Bristol Community College studio building. The Spindle City Ballet is doing their Christmas ballet. So I guess my co-host and our guests are kind of caught in the traffic jam that's going on out there. But let's get right to some of the issues today that are going on here in Fall River. It's interesting to see how this recall election this week has panned out. People are starting to get back to life as usual, and I think people are starting to recover from something that never happened before in Massachusetts and probably will never happen again. So it's kind of interesting to see. It appears that my good morning to our guests.
Hello, CJ.
Les Rich, how are you?
Hello out there. We have with us today Les Rich, the man, the legend, who beat the big law firm and was our attorney during the recall. And we have we're going to be able to talk to Les a little bit about the whole process. And and before we begin, I want to tell everybody that Les took on a big corporation here. They had a lot of people working, and he did it on his own, and he did a tremendous job. And for that, we thank him. And now I'll turn it over to you, Les, and tell us a little bit about all the work you did.
Well, thank you. It was really a labor of love a little bit. It's we were defending a recall process that was flawed from the beginning. The law is definitely very flawed, and every maneuver that they could take, the mayor took to stop the recall. And we worked hard, and really. The applaud has to go out to the people of Fall River for having that determination to buck the system, to basically fight and get the recall accomplished. And but the legal process was tedious, and we went through it step by step, and I think we were successful. At the end, I don't think the interpretation is exactly the way it should have been, but the important thing was to get the election to go. And really the reason we didn't appeal was because we wanted to get this election over with. The people of Fall River needed it.
Well, and you are so right. The people did speak and spoke very loudly. It's almost 70%. He was defeated by almost the same amount. He was elected only a year before. But this is historic. It's the first time in the history of the Commonwealth that a mayor's ever been recalled. And it's not the first time in a city there's ever been a recall. The first time in a Commonwealth there's ever been. How does it feel to be the attorney that spearheaded and took the legal steps necessary? Because as you said, it was a battle. The mayor had a tremendous amount of financial resources, and he had everything going for him, and he appointed all the commissioners and the Board of Elections, et cetera, and all the recusals and stuff. But it was an uphill battle from the beginning. But I mean, how does it feel to be the attorney now that forever will be, in history as the man who was the legal representative of the infamous recall of Fall River?
Well, obviously there's a sense of accomplishment and in pride. Again, it's without the support of the recallers themselves, you couldn't make it happen. The recallers helped, get all the information we needed, but certainly I'm really proud to have aided in this whole endeavor, and it's really a good sense of accomplishment.
Well, and you did a tremendous job, as I said, under tremendous adversity. You didn't, you had to sit there basically alone and get all this together to counter what an entire law firm was working on, and basically had almost all their resources committed to this issue. And I think it was an awesome accomplishment, and it speaks volumes. But the process, we talked about the process. I mean,
right.
ABC6 even picked this up, and they wrote a piece about how this is basically, it was ironically on the same day as the Boston Tea Party, but it reaffirms what people can do. And I mean, what is your attitude about, this is one of the problems I see being an activist. CJ and I have been activists for a long time, and the problem is the old adage, you can't fight City Hall. And it's not because you're not right, it's because you don't have the financial resources. And many, many people have been right and have had a righteous cause and could not prevail because they just, you just can't do it. You think this did put a little dent in that people now believe that they can stand up and really, rage against the cities and towns and our government?
Yeah, it is a very expensive and difficult process. You're going from the beginning. Here you had an election commission that was appointed by the mayor, who was going to rule whether or not, legitimatizing the recall process. And then all of a sudden, when the mayor saw that he wasn't going to get his way, even with his own appointed committee, they all of a sudden recused people for kind of, strange, obviously within a small community like Fall River, there's always going to be somebody knows somebody and someone's related to somebody, so it's never going to be a 100% fair process. But, we were willing to go forward, but the mayor all of a sudden backed down from that, and we ended up in court. And so to go to court, it is a very expensive process. And in most communities, the people wouldn't have the determination to spend the money and to go through that process and all the work that's involved. I recently got a call from the city in Saugus. The Saugus wants to recall their selectmen. Now the selectmen themselves have put a stop to the recall process, and so they're saying, well, now what do we do? They have this basically the same problem. They're going to have to go to court, and they're going to have to battle it out. I don't know if they're going to have the determination to actually go through with it like the people of Fall River, the recallers, who really battled this out. But the legal process, step by step, the mayor did not want this recall to happen, and even though he seemed to have a feeling like he would prevail, which he didn't, but he knew if it happened, there was a good possibility he wouldn't prevail.
Well, as I said, it's contagious. CJ, you can weigh in here, but obviously it's contagious. I think Saugus is doing it. There are other people considering it, we hear, and but what troubles me sometimes is the deck being stacked against people like this. It's like, as you said, this recall, you don't get to really exercise it until you're in the midst of it, and then after you do that, you find that a lot of these recall provisions have flaws in them, and they're flawed as ours was, and do you think we should do something like California, where the recall process is kind of almost a constitutional thing, and they basically define who can run and who can't run, or do you think that each city and town should be left to their own devices?
Well, I think throughout the country it's a difficult question. The big question really is whether or not the recalled official should be able to run. And that's a battle going on throughout the country. And you're right, there's a few states that have it, the recall process as a constitutional process. I think within the Commonwealth, being that there's so many, almost all the communities have recall statutes, and there's always little tweaks that are different. I think they should have a unified system that everybody can follow. That'll make the rules more specific, so you don't have to guess what the rules are. Fall River probably has the most, the weakest statute.
Well,
You know,
it doesn't surprise me because we also had, it's also a community with the least amount of money, but we managed to, it just went to show that sometimes being from a city that has tough economic times, it breeds kind of tough people. And the people persevered in the recall, even though that this city probably is one of the worst cities in the Commonwealth as far as having the financial ability to pay with the people. But we got together, we showed that a committed group can change the world, and we really did, I think. And CJ, come on.
Well, I've just been waiting because I've been enjoying the conversation. Welcome, Les. It's been a while since we've been together, and even now we're still really not together. Right. We had a few technical difficulties when the show started, but I'm glad we've resolved that problem. But I had a severe problem because a lot of people took this as personal attacks, and the Secretary of State's office actually told us regularly, we're not touching it, there's nothing we can do. Even when it came down to people not receiving their absentee ballots, which we still have documentation of. And the Secretary of State's office said, if you want your rights, you have to sue for them. Isn't that amazing? I mean, is that what we've come down to in this country, Les? That if we want to exercise our civil rights and the rights granted to us by our own Constitution, that to get them, we have to file a lawsuit and spend thousands of dollars for that to happen? I mean, that just doesn't seem right to me.
No, I agree. It's unfortunately the Attorney General, Secretary of State, they tend to enforce things based upon politics and not based upon law. They have a job to do, and they should have done it. But they're going to argue with you that they don't have the resources to deal with every complaint. But that's why it actually goes to the argument that if there was a statewide recall process that specified that the recourse would be to the Secretary of State or the Attorney General, whatever the statute was, they would then be forced to do that. Right now, these are all local statutes, and it's kind of left in vague and in a void of whether or not they actually absolutely have to come in and step in. But election laws within the Commonwealth are enforced really by the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State's supposed to step in when there's violations. And you can file in court, you can file complaints, but it doesn't do you much good in the long run because everyone has complaints.
Well, that's true, Les. The thing that really, you've said it, and maybe we're right. I mean, should the citizens of the Commonwealth maybe consider getting together to create a binding referendum question on the state ballot, forcing a recall provision into law? I mean, is that a possibility? Because obviously our governor, our state legislature, they're not going to write that and pass it. There's no way, because then as soon as the state gets fed up with a governor who's not doing what they're supposed to do, or a state legislator, they're going to be subject to a recall. I mean, so is this something that maybe the citizens should consider doing? Getting together and saying, we're done, we want this as a matter of state law, so you cannot do this again?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. If the citizens can come up with a law that everyone can accept. The politicians, they want a recall act that makes it very difficult to actually get recalled because they want to keep their power. That's why a lot of communities, they have it where the recalled person can then rerun for the same position again. And I don't see where that makes any logic at all. That if a community wants to recall an official, that person, once he's recalled, should not be able to then rerun in the same election for the same position. Like what happened here. And I do believe that in a position where it's a majority vote, they should have had actually a runoff because all mayors in Fall River always been elected by a majority of the people. But the argument on the other side is that in Fall River you have a mayor who's in for 2 years. And it becomes a tedious process that every 6 months you could have a recall election in theory.
Yeah. Well, on that, that gets me into another question that has always bothered me. I mean, during this process, and we were, obviously we were intimately involved with it, the mayor continued to contend and say that it's too easy for the people to recall someone. And they said that the bar should be set yet where you have to basically have high crimes in order to, so in other words, you can get rid of your auto mechanic because he can't fix your car, but if a politician doesn't do his job, he has to murder 70,000 people to get to be recalled. What are your feelings about that? I mean, my personal opinion, and you can tell me what your opinion is, obviously. My personal opinion is the bar shouldn't be set, where two people can initiate a recall, but I think the bar should be intentionally fairly reasonably low to allow the people to speak, because as we saw in Fall River, sometimes the vocal minority becomes a majority because there are many people, especially in communities like Fall River, who are afraid to come forward. How many people did we see, CJ, and during the recall process that were afraid to sign because they had a city job, or somebody they knew had a city job, or because they were afraid of retaliation? Yet, what did we see in the election? 7 out of 10 people voted for the recall, and we had a really amazingly high turnout for this city. And so, I mean, these people who contend that, we have to set the bar really high because it's, a minority can recall. But I think that article from AB 66 said it best. He said, that's the way our revolution started. A minority of radicals started our American Revolution. But then it began to gain momentum, and then we had what we had. So, I mean, I don't know. What's your feeling? You think that the bar should be set, like, somewhere? I think it should be, if we're going to err, it should be on the side of having it a little lower to allow the people to speak.
Yeah, I mean, the only argument against it is there's some cost to having election, the nuisance of the election. But I think that nuisance is far outweighed by the people having a vote and having a say in their government, especially in Fall River. Fall River has, it doesn't have a balance of power. Fall River has, a very bad governmental situation because you basically have a dictator in the mayor. And that's just a bad situation. So you should be able to, in effect, overthrow the king. You should be able to, to be able to do that. And the people should have a say. In this particular case, I think, quite frankly, the pay-as-you-throw kind of threw it over the edge. The mayor, the pay-as-you-throw was an illegal act as far as I'm concerned. It was put in at basically the mayor saying, here it is. There was no vote of the city council, there was no referendum of the people like in every other community in the Commonwealth. And the people basically were outraged, by that action. Not to say that pay-as-you-throw is bad, but it should have been done through the people and with the people's approval. And so I would agree with you that the bar should not be set so high that your politicians need to be accountable. They need to be, before they take an action, they need to know that, well, what is my constituency going to say about this? What are the people who I represent going to say about this, and how are they going to feel about this?
But Les, that's one of the problems with Fall River. The biggest problem we have here, these people are like lemmings, okay? They will follow the Pied Piper right off the end of the cliff and not think twice about it. And, it's really sad to say that, but, I mean, when you look at this special election, this recall election, over 16,000 people came out to vote. We don't even get that in a state election primary. Sometimes we don't even get that for a general election. Most of the time we don't. So, I mean, we finally made a statement, and I think that, as you've said, and as Chip and I have spoken about many times, the rights of the people always need to be upheld. But, the biggest problem we have is we have a process that requires people to spend money. They have to spend thousands of dollars out of their pocket And I was doing a quick rundown of how much money that was just spent by the city and the mayor. The mayor spent $32,000 on legal counsel for this recall. The city obviously spent twice that amount because they're the city and that's what they do. And your fees haven't been included in that. So this is what we have to do so that we can hold our elected officials responsible, because for some reason in Fall River, once you're elected, you are there for life. It's almost like a lifetime position. You just got to jump through the hoop every 2 years to say, I'm running. And God forbid you make a statement like I've made several times that you started at the top and you work your way down and now you clean up the rest of it. And, because just because you cut the head off the hydra doesn't mean that the body dies. It's just very questionable to me on why we have to sue. Why do we have to get a lawyer for every single thing? Because it's impossible. For some communities, it's going to be physically impossible to do. It really is.
I think the important thing is to have the balance of power. You need to have you really need a two political system makes it better. To have that's the benefit of having two parties at least. But also to have the executive branch and the legislative branch as two at least equal powers, because then there's some checks and balances. It's not just one person, making a determination that this is the way it's going to be. Now, as far as recalls go, every recall is challenged, and every time there's a recall in the state, there's every single one is challenged, because it's just that's the standard operating procedure for a politician who's they're attempting to be recalled. Your only solution to that would be legislation, like you said, a referendum to have a constitutional amendment that would make it very clear what the process is, and have the recourse through various boards, let's say a state election commission, things like that. That would probably stop that part of the process. But it doesn't necessarily stop the mayor or even the city council from passing bad law that the citizens have to challenge. I first got involved in my first case in Fall River was with the casino. They passed a law that was illegal, and they were taking an action that was illegal. The people had to. It was a taxpayer lawsuit. It had to go through the expense of filing a lawsuit, and there was no balance of power. There was no city council approval again. It was just a board making a decision, and the people were stuck with it. I believe that if you had a more balanced governmental system, you'd have much less of this, because the people would have input into the process. But there's really nothing you can do. Ultimately, if the government's taking an action that's illegal and no one else does anything, the people are going to have to spend the money to try to fight it.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate, and that's the thing that really disturbs me, because we have so many political facades that put up. It's just like the pay as you throw. You mentioned pay as you throw. Now they continue to say, oh, everybody's happy with pay as you throw now because we have a 98% compliance rate. Well, because people are using the bags because they don't want to get a $300 fine doesn't mean they're happy with it. These people, the way politicians, political speak has nothing to do with reality. It's like the way they manipulate things and the way they frame things, it's virtually impossible, to get to the bottom of things. And then when you get a situation where you have to take everything to court. And as you said, and I understand politicians want to make it very difficult for them to lose their nice jobs, but the reality is this is supposedly is a government, a representative form of government of the people, and and I understand it. You wouldn't be in favor of having everything so finite you don't need lawyers, but but in reality, as you said, there are certain things. Like we're looking at a charter change in Fall River which could be helpful, and constitutional amendments in the state about recall provisions and stuff could make it easier. And I'm sure that you support any kind of initiative that will allow the people to have a more level playing field, because the playing field we were on, it was tilted. We were running uphill the whole time. So.
Yeah, the process that we had to go through was extremely burdensome, and I just have a belief that if you had a balanced system, and when a law is passed, it is truly the desire of the majority of the people. There can be still a minority of the people who don't like it, and they might want to challenge it in court. So obviously they can do that, and you can't have. I mean, unfortunately, you can't. Everybody can't be happy all the time. It's just you just can't do that. So there has to be a process. But I think that and so you're never going to get away with totally that. There won't be stuff going to court. But I believe that this process, the way it currently is, has to be changed.
Yeah, well, it's ironic, because I think what we proved here today, CJ, and with this recall, and I think one of the most important things that this recall proved is it's not a minority sometime. Mm-hmm. There is a silent majority out there. And in many communities, they're afraid of politicians. They're afraid of the power they have, the ability to affect their lives. And they don't, they may not have the courage or the wherewithal to stand up. And when a few people get up and say this, then when they get to the polls, they exercise. Then we find out, because, for years we were, through this entire process, we were called the vocal minority, the anti-Semites, and every other name known to man. And basically, I think just before the election, one of the mayor's confidants said that we were going to get crushed on election day, and we'd all be sued. And I believe on election night, I think Admiral Gaudette was on the radio the day after the election, saying how when he saw all these new voters, people he'd never seen at the polls before, he realized they were doomed. Then, of course, the caveat was, I really like Sam Sutter, mayor-elect, because Admiral's always up the hindquarter of every mayor. But the fact is that, the fact is, it was almost like he was saying that was a bad thing. We had voters involved in the process. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it boggles my mind. And they continue to characterize these movements as a movement of a minority, when in fact it's a movement of the majority, but most of that majority is silent because they fear.
Yeah, but Chip, the revolutionary participants, the patriots as they're now known, were the fringe minority, okay? They, stood up against King George, and they stood up against, tyranny. And how many times I referred to Will Flanagan as King George, I lost count. But, what's the difference between the winners of a revolution and, the losers? The losers are called treasonous. The winners are called patriots. So today, the people of Fall River are patriots. And, you can't get any better than that. You really can't. But our time is coming quick. So last comments from everybody, and we'll go from there. Les?
Well, no, I just, I'm going to be hopefully working with the City Council to change the laws in the city so that we don't have to go through this process ever again. I mean, it's good for the lawyers, but that's the only one it's good for.
Well, Les, I want to say thank you for the work you did. It was a pleasure. You did a tremendous job, and the people of Fall River, you proved that there is a silent majority, and regardless of what happens, that if we all stick together, we can prevail.
And that's so true. And now that we're coming to the end of the year, and the holiday season is here upon us, it's very interesting to see that we are going to start out this new year with a new captain at the helm. And hopefully, a new Fall River will start to arise.
Up the Rebels. Congratulations,
Thank
Les.
you.
And thank you very much for watching Spindle City Straight Talk. You all have a great day now.